Hello everybody, this is lesson 7. We're going to work with percentages, decimals, and fractions, and we want to be able to write numbers as either percentages or the equivalent form of a decimal or the equivalent form of a fraction. To get started, we want to make sure we understand what the word percent really means. Percent means per, we've got the per part here, and then the cent is 100. So think of something like a century, that's 100 years. Or if I think of a dollar, it has 100 cents in the dollar. So we want to make sure we understand that percentages mean per hundred, and what we are really doing is taking our number and we are comparing that number with 100. Or if you like to think of it as a fraction, which we will be doing, you're comparing the number to 100, but the 100 shows up in the denominator. So let's take a look at some examples. We'll start out with a number that is already a percent, and we use this symbol to mean percent, or in other words, it means that our number is being compared to 100. So let's say we have 42%. As soon as we see that percent sign, it means that that number is really being compared to 100. I could replace that percent sign with 1 over 100, and it is then really 42 multiplied by 1 over 100, or 42 over 100. So that is now written as a fraction, 42% equivalent to 42 over 100. If I was trying to write it as a fraction, I would take that 42 over 100 and I would simplify it. Let's take a look at another example. 6% would be the equivalent of 6 compared to 100. I can think of it as multiplied by 1 over 100 to give me 6 over 100, or hopefully you'll start to say 6% is a number compared to 100, and you'll write that 6 directly over the 100. Let's do one more. Let's say I have 160%. That would be equivalent to 160 compared to 100, or over 100. So that gives us an idea of what these percentages really are, just numbers being compared to 100. So let's now look at see how we change percentages to decimal values. Let's say we have 35.2%. We want to change that to a decimal. So I'm going to take my 35.2%, and if I think of that as a fraction or comparison to 100, that would be 35.2 divided by 100. To convert that to a decimal, I will need to do my long division. Until we look at the shortcut, that is. If I do the long division, I'm dividing 100 into 35.2. And remember from our previous lesson, I want to look at this divisor 100. It's not a decimal number, so I don't need to move any decimal places. I will take the decimal in my 35.2 and bring that straight up above. And I want to see how many times 100 goes into 352. That would be 3 times. 3 times 100 gives us 300. Subtracting that, we get 52. Now we have a remainder here, so I'm going to add a 0 and bring that down. Continue to divide. 100 into 520 goes 5 times, leaving me with 500, and when I subtract, I get 20. I'm going to need to bring down another 0. And now 100 into 200 goes twice, and there is no longer any remainder. So squeezing that in there, I have a remainder now of 0. So 35.2% written as a decimal is 0.352. Now most of you remember your shortcut. If I'm really dividing by 100, again that's what my percent sign means. If I have the number 35.2 and I'm dividing it by 100, our shortcut says that we can move our decimal place two places because there's two zeros in the 100. So two places or place values to the left. And again, that is because we are dividing by 100. So right from the beginning, I could have taken my 35.2 to divide by 100, take that decimal value place and move it 1, 2, 2 places to the left, leaving me with 0.352, and another way of writing that is 0.352. So there is our decimal value equivalent to 35.2%. So what we want to remember when we are changing a percent to a decimal, we can use our shortcut. What I would do is remove the percent sign and move the decimal place not really move the decimal place, but move the decimal two places to the left. And really that is the easiest way, quickest way to change a percent to a decimal. Alright, so let's just quickly do a few more of these. Let's say that I want to change 46.2% to a decimal. Following my rules, I'm going to remove the percent sign and just write 46.2, and then I'm going to move the decimal two places to the left. So 46.2% is equivalent to 0.462 as a decimal. Okay, let's go ahead and turn our page and look at some examples now. We are going to change percents to decimals. We are going to change 25%. We are going to change 75%, 6.8%, and 0.4%. Just going to quickly write down what the step is we're going to take. Just so we have it on the same page. Remove the percent sign. Move our decimal two places to the left. Alright, go to it. I'll go ahead and write down what we would get for each of these. Please check your answers. All right, I expect that if you have any questions on how I got any of these values in A, B, C, or D, you will come and see me and get clarification. All right, we are going to now take a look at what happens if we are going to start with a decimal number and change that to a percent. So we're going to start with a decimal, we're going to change to a percent. Now, when we are changing from a decimal to a percent, we're going the opposite direction of what we just did in the example above. So for example, when we had 25% in A above, we changed it to a decimal and got 0.25. So I already know that 0.25 changed to a percent is going to give me 25%. So what we are really doing is the opposite set of steps that we did in the example above. So here's what I mean. To change from a decimal to a percent, we want to move our decimal place, or move our decimal 2 places. Instead of going to the left, we're moving 2 places to the right. And then after we do that, we are going to insert our percent sign. All right, what we are really doing then when we move our decimal 2 places to the right is multiplying by 100. So let's take a look at some examples. Let's take 0.42, I'm going to call this A, and I want to change it to a percent. So I am going to move my decimal place 2 places to the right, 1, 2, which gives me 42 with the decimal place afterwards, and I'm going to insert a percent sign. And that's all there is to it. Let's take a look at another one. If I have the decimal number 4.89 and I want to change that to a percent, I'm going to take my decimal place, move it 2 places to the right. I will get 489, and I want to insert a percent sign. Example C, we'll use 4.5%. Move the decimal 2 places to the right. I'm going to need to add a 0 to get my decimal to be 2 places moved. And then I am going to add a percent sign. Did anybody notice that I mistakenly put a percent sign on my first example there? That should be 4.5, equivalent to 450%. All right, now let's take a look at what we do when we are changing our fractions to percentages. So I'm going to take fractions and I want to change them to percents. Let's take a look at the fractional value 7/10. So I'm going to take 7/10. That's my fraction, and I want to change it to a percent. Remember, our percentages are compared to 100. Right now, 7/10 is compared, well, it's 7 compared to 10. The easiest way when I have a denominator that can easily be multiplied by something to give me 100, the easiest way is to try and rewrite this with the denominator of 100. To do that, I would need to multiply the denominator by 10. Doing the same to the numerator gives me a numerator of 70. Now, think back to what we did at the beginning of this lesson. I have 70 compared to 100, which is the equivalent of 70%. What I want to do is come back to changing these fractions to percentages, and first start with changing percentages to fractions, kind of like what we did in example 4 above, only we had decimals being changed to percentages. I'm going to give you some fractions, and I'm going to give you some percents, and we're going to change those to a fraction, and then that will make it a little bit easier when we go backwards and change more fractions to percents. Fractions not like this example I just did with the 7/10, but fractions that are not so easily converted to comparisons to 100. So what I want to do now is take a percent, like 20%, and I want to start by changing that to a fraction. I'm going to remove that percent sign and write this as 20 compared to 100, and then I would need to simplify that. Each of these can be divided by 10 because they each end in a 0. If I do that, I will get 2/10, but I haven't simplified it completely. I can actually divide this or simplify it even more because 2 is a factor of both the numerator and denominator, which gives me a fraction of 1/5. So 20% is equivalent to 1/5 as a fraction. Let's take a look at another. Let's take a look at 16%. Writing that as a number compared to 100. I can simplify this by dividing the numerator and denominator by a common factor of 4. And I get 4/25, which can no longer be simplified. If I have something like 23%, I would compare that to 100, and that does not reduce, cannot be further simplified. So that is my final fraction for that one. 24%, however, when written as a comparison to 100, can be simplified more. 4 is a common factor of 24 and 100, so that reduces down to 6/25, and that cannot be simplified any further. Alright, so that gives us an idea of how to change our percentages to fractions. Sometimes, though, we may get some stranger values. Stranger meaning a little bit more complicated. Supposing I have something like 4.5%. If I compare that to 100 and write it as 4.5/100, I have a fraction, but I have as part of my fraction a decimal value, which we really don't want. So before I can do any simplifying, I need to rewrite this so that I have just integer values. To get 4.5 to be an integer, I would need to multiply by 10, thus moving the decimal place one place to the right, and if I do that in the numerator, I must also do it in the denominator. So now I'm going to get 45 over 1,000. And this is the fraction that I can now simplify. 5 goes into both of these. And I know that because 5 goes into any number that ends in a 5 or a 0. When I divide 45 by 5, I get 9. When I divide 1,000 by 5, I get 200. That fraction cannot be simplified anymore, so that would be our final fraction. All right, let's do another one that is a little bit complex. And let's say we have 32 and 1/2%. Actually, I think we'll make that a little bit tougher because most of you know 32 and a half as a fraction could be written as 32.5, and that would be just a little bit too easy for you. So let's say instead of 32 and 1/2 as our fraction, we have 32 and 1/3%. What I would need to do is write this as a comparison to 100. So I would have 32 and 1/3 over 100. Because I have this mixed number now in the numerator and I really want an integer, I'm going to first rewrite this as an improper fraction. Now remember to write 32 and 1/3 as an improper fraction. I would write 32, multiply it by 3, that denominator value, and then I would add a 1 for the 1 that I have in the numerator here, and write that all with a common denominator of 3. If I do that, I get 32 times 3 is 96, plus my 1 over 3 gives me an improper fraction, 97 over 3. So, back to my other fraction, 32 and 1/3 is the equivalent of 97 over 3, but all of that is being divided by 100. Now, this is the same as a divide by sign. So I'm going to rewrite this as 97 over 3, my improper fraction, divided by 100. And now I can think of this as a division problem where I keep the 97 over 3, change my divide by to a multiplication, and multiply by the reciprocal of 100, or 1 over 100. To do that, I multiply numerators. I get 97, and I want to divide that by 3 times 100, or 300. And that does not simplify further, so that is my fractional equivalent to 32 and 1/3%. All right, let's take a look now at example 6, where I'm going to go the other way and I'm going to change a fraction to a percent. And we did this once already where we had a fractional value of 7 over 10. And we said that one was easy to change to something that has a comparison of 100 or denominator of 100. And we said that becomes 70 over 100. So as a percent, that is 70 with a percent sign. If I have something like 3 over 50, we'll call this one A, this one B. This is another example of a fraction where it would be fairly simple to rewrite it so that the denominator is 100, and I could do that by multiplying both the numerator and the denominator by 2, and we would get 6 over 100. So changing that to a percent, it's being compared to 100. This would be 6 with a percent sign. What is more complicated is if we have something like 5 over 12. This one is not so easy to multiply the numerator and denominator by some value that will give us 100. So what we can do is first change this to a decimal value and then use what we know about decimals and percentages and change our decimal to a percent by moving our decimal 2 places to the right. To change a fraction to a decimal, I can use long division. And so I would take the 12, make that the divisor, and divide it into 5, the dividend. Because 12 is not going to go into 5 at all, I'm going to need at least one number beyond my decimal place. I've gone ahead and put 2 in there, but I don't know if I really need 2 at this point, or if 1 will be enough, or if I need more. So let's just get started and see where we end up. 12 into 5 does not go at all, but 12 into 50 will go 4 times, giving me 48. When I subtract that, I get 2. We'll bring down a 0. 12 into 20 goes 1 time. There's something I didn't do here though. I'm going to go back and put in my decimal place. There we go. So returning back to my division, 12 into 20 goes once. When I subtract that, I get 8. And I still have a remainder, so I'm going to need another 0. Bringing down another 0. 12 into 8. Got to do a little guessing and checking. If I do, I'll find that that will go 6 times, and 6 12s is 72. When I subtract that, we'll get 8, and I'll need to bring down another 0, and I'm going to start getting this 8 recurring, and 12 going into the 86 times. So I'm going to get a repeating decimal value of 6. So if I were to bring down another 0, this would go in another 6 times. And I'm getting a repeating pattern here. So my 5/12 written as a decimal, I'm going to write this here, 0.41666 repeating. Now to change this to a percent, I'm going to do what we did earlier. I'm going to move the decimal place 2 places and get 41.666 repeating, and I'm going to insert a percent sign. Now some of you might recognize that 0.666666 repeating is the same as 2/3, so you could also write this as 41 2/3%. Alright, that is going to conclude our lesson. I just want you to remember that if you are changing a fraction to a percent, a couple of ways you could do this. You could try and rewrite your fraction so it's compared to 100 or has a decimal value of 100, as we did in this example A and example B. Or you could take your fraction, do your long division, change it to a decimal, and then a decimal to a percent, as we did in this example C. Alright, that wraps up lesson 7. Thanks very much, guys, and have a great day.